Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's Germination Retail Roundtable webinar. My name is Mark Zinkowitz, and I serve as editor for Germination, and I'm happy to be your host today. Today's theme is When Traits Come Off Patent, Practicing Good Stewardship of SGNTs. We'll hear from three experts who will talk about the intricacies surrounding SGNTs and what to know about this new area of the retail sphere. Now, before we begin, I would like to thank our webinar sponsors, 2020 Seed Labs and SeCan, for their support. Now, you may have a question during our webinar. If you have a question at any point, please just type it into the chat box and we'll get to your question at the end of our webinar. Also, this webinar is being recorded, just so you know, and a recording of the webinar will be available on germination.ca within 48 hours. Now we have three speakers joining us today. Jennifer Hubert is the Executive Director of Plant Biotechnology at CropLife Canada. Todd Hyra is Western Business Manager for SeCan, and Kim Kenward is R&D Manager for 2020 Seed Labs. Welcome, everybody. There's Jennifer, Todd, and Kim. Hello, thanks for joining me, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Looking forward to it.
Now, as I mentioned, today's webinar is about SGNTs. Now, this term might be new to our audience. If you don't know what it means, SGNT stands for Seeds with Generic Novel Traits. Now, as biotech traits reach the end of their intellectual property protection, including patent protection, opportunities for the seed sector present themselves in regards to selling seeds with these traits in them. But along with these opportunities, as we're going to discuss, comes the need for good stewardship practices to protect the integrity and durability of products, to support grower productivity and sustainability, as well as to support international trade. Now, we're going to start with Jennifer. Jennifer, thank you so much for taking the time to be on our webinar today. You're going to introduce us to this topic of SGNTs, what they are, and what people in the seed sphere, especially the retail sphere, need to be aware of when it comes to selling them, and also considerations for developers and users as well. Welcome, Jennifer.
Great, thanks, Mark.
I'll turn the floor over to you. I just clicked over to the first slide of your presentation. So as I say, just use the next button there and take it away.
Great, thank you. Yes, this is it's a pretty complex topic, and it's something that we've been talking about for over 10 years. So today I'm just going to try to explain the best I can in the short time that we have where these discussions have taken us. So the first of commercial biotechnology events in the United States went off patent and became generic back in 2014. And leading up to this, to prepare for it, the Biotechnology Industry Organization, or BIO, and the American Seed Trade Association, ASTA, worked with the ag value chain to create what they called the Ag Accord. And this accord entails a contractual legal framework to support business opportunities for those seeking to use off-patent events in the United States, while ensuring important global regulatory commitments are maintained for off-patent events, with the goal of protecting U.S. exports from disruption. So this Ag Accord was established in 2012, and information on this framework was presented at multiple CSTA meetings around that time. So I'm just giving a little background before I get into the slides here. There's some certain intricacies that have to do with the global approvals for biotech traits, as well as product-specific stewardship, where if they were not understood by people selling these traits, it could create issues with trait performance, as well as international trade issues. And to explain this a little bit further, it's important to know how the regulatory environment works for biotech traits and how it's different from pesticides. So why this would be different than what's being done for pesticides. And really briefly, for pesticides, every manufacturer of a pesticide, including a generic manufacturer, needs to get their own approval. But for plant biotech, once products are authorized, for the most part, anyone can use it and additional authorizations aren't needed, although there are some exceptions. And one complicating factor of this is that prior to launching products for the first time in Canada, given the global trade of grain, it's been best practice to secure approvals in key trading markets. And we just, CropLife Canada and Seeds Canada also just published a best practices document for launching plant breeding innovations that describe this and the considerations that go into that. So the other thing is these approvals have time limits and they require renewals. And so with new entities entering into the markets, there was concern over there being sufficient awareness around market access and stewardship best practices and who will maintain these global authorizations. So stemming from this, CropLife Canada and at the time, the Canadian Seed Trade Association created a joint working group to frame up the issue and identify specific needs for Canada. Since the accord was only for the US, we needed to determine if we needed something similar in Canada. And the mandate of this working group was to develop strategies for introducing generic products to the marketplace that would ensure export market access is maintained, to ensure the confidence in the Canadian regulatory system is maintained, that sustainable production practices are supported, and that clear messaging is developed. These strategies were to include clarifying roles and responsibilities of the various entities involved, ensuring equal obligations by generic users and the original authorized entity in terms of things like market access and stewardship, which in turn contribute to maintaining trait sustainability and product integrity, and to enable innovators to be able to exit the market responsibly at their discretion. These discussions led to the development of a white paper. This is a white paper, a CropLife Canada, Seeds Canada, or CSTA white paper developed in 2016 that really framed up the issue and the roles and responsibilities of various value chain members. And this included establishing the scope and coining the term SGNTs. So this is a very Canadian specific term that has to do with our Canadian novelty regulations. Seeds with generic traits. I'm going to touch a little bit more on that on the next slide. Following this was a discussion paper with various options for best practices for responsibly introducing a marketplace for SGNTs. And then we spent a couple of years conducting a deeper dive into two specific areas. The first was the applicability of the Ag Accord in Canada, or the need for a Canada-specific version. By this time, the Ag Accord had been in place for a few years, and there were some lessons learned. And after several discussions on this, it was agreed that the focus in Canada would be on education and best practices, and any needs for contractual agreements between companies would be developed by interested parties on a case-by-case basis between themselves. We felt the importance was really about informing generic seed developers and the seed industry of various considerations they may not have thought about with regards to stewardship and market access. We also had a legal assessment conducted on the CFIA regulations in terms of stewardship obligations that are part of the conditions of authorizations by CFIA. Seed derived from approved seed is exempt from regulations, but it wasn't clear how this exemption applied to authorizations where there were conditions. So for example, BT corn has specific insect resistance management activities that need to be implemented that are part of the condition of authorization. So when under patent protection, the developer can enforce these through contractual agreements with licensees and growers. But after patent expiration, the developer can't do this with entities who may be selling the seed without any contracts in place. Unfortunately, the obligations, if any, for with the CFIA regarding these conditions is still unclear. We've had several meetings with the CFIA in attempts to clarify, and we're still working on this. But regardless of the government requirement, there remains a biological need for all users to implement good stewardship to protect the trait. So with these two items considered, we went forward and we recently finalized a document that provides considerations and best practices for responsibly introducing seeds containing generic novel traits in the Canadian marketplace. So as I mentioned, we define the scope of this document as seeds with generic novel traits, or SGNTs, which we define as seed that requires a pre-market authorization in Canada or in a key market where patents have expired and an entity other than the original developer is marketing the trait. The objective is really about education and driving awareness, as I've said, that will support innovators to exit the market and SGNT marketers to be properly informed on activities that they should consider implementing to avoid market disruptions and products are stewarded appropriately. So this is a summary of our document. I don't want to get into it too much here today. Ultimately, there are various best practices that all users need to be implementing. So namely, the recently published joint CropLife Canada and Seeds Canada best practices for launching plant breeding innovations that I previously mentioned, as well as existing guidance on product discontinuation that CropLife has, as well as excellence through stewardship. There's also specific recommendations if you're the original developer or if you're the new entity marketing the generic trait. So with the original developer, they have a responsibility around advanced communication to the seed sector about any expiration of relevant authorizations. And any new entity marketing these traits needs to proactively develop a plan for how authorizations will be maintained as long as they are being marketed. The document also includes some resources and information regarding domestic regulatory authorizations, international regulatory authorizations, and resistance management stewardship. And this information would help provide new entities that aren't really familiar with these things the needed information. So as I said, this was developed by a joint Seeds Canada, CropLife Canada working group. It's been reviewed by the CropLife Canada Plant Biotech Committee and also shared with, reviewed by the Seeds Canada Biotech Committee. It's been shared with the entire Seeds Canada membership and also shared with the Canada Grains Commission, Council for further value chain input. So currently we're waiting to seek input from the value chain. And then we'll be looking to publish the document on the CropLife Canada and Seeds Canada website, and we'll be doing some outreach with the full seed sector to ensure awareness of it, hopefully in the next few months. And that's all from me, Mark.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. That's very helpful because this has been a topic that's come up. Well, even last year, I was talking with people in the industry who were wondering about this. You know, what do we do as these products come off patent? How do we ensure good stewardship? Who's going to lead on this? And CropLife Canada has really stepped up to help lead on this topic. So thank you very much for that. Don't go anywhere. We're going to do a little Q&A towards the end of the webinar, so I'm sure there will be some audience questions. So please hang on the line. Now, next, we're going to hear from Todd Hyra. He's Western Business Manager at SeCan. Hi, Todd. How are you today?
Fine, thanks, Mark.
Good to see you, sir. Now, the reason I asked you to be on the webinar is SeCan offers, I believe it's 2 products containing SGNTs. Now, you're going to tell us a bit about these and what you're doing at SeCan to ensure good stewardship in this area. I know this is very valuable for our audience because it's great to hear firsthand from someone who works at a company that actually offers products containing SGNTs. It'll be great to find out what you guys are doing, again, to help lead in this area. So I'll turn the floor over to you, Todd. You're going to give a short presentation here. So take it away.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, I've been on the working group with Jennifer for several years now, and until you actually put it into practical terms, the real life product, then it's a little hard to get your head around. And so hopefully the examples I have provide some useful examples of how to move forward.
Exactly.
So we have 2 products in our portfolio, as you mentioned, both soybeans. Both of these were developed publicly by North Dakota State University in Fargo. And both products have been since registered in Canada, and PBR protection is in process on both. So SeCan has a full portfolio of soybeans with new technologies, including the Extend as well as Enlist E3 soybeans. And from our practical experience, generally new is better. And when we were looking at these, we thought, even though the new products will generally move in the direction of higher performance, we thought there was an opportunity, particularly in soybeans, because they provided, I guess, a value position for soybean customers who are maybe in fringe areas who face higher risk and may lose a crop with a greater frequency due to short season or extreme drought. And so that's what our thought process was in this, thinking that they're not going to be top shelf performance, but they're going to be good performers and provide some risk management for individuals interested in soybeans. So once again, these offer a legitimate source of off-patent material with known genetics and quality. We've run across off-patent soybeans being sold with really no genetic background or any idea of what they were. So this is a legitimate source. Also collect royalty off of the sale of these products so that we can encourage further development. So there's kind of 2 buckets when you think about product development with something with a trait. There's the trait itself, and then there's the adapted genetics. And that's, once again, these are Roundup Ready 1s that we're talking about, and having the strongest performance Roundup Ready 1s you can, and making sure that there's a will for developers to continue to invest in doing something rather than just have them float around for free. So once again, I mentioned an important piece of this is the production of pedigreed seed, isolation, crop inspection, all of that helping ensure that the stewardship is off to a good start. Seed is all tested for genetic purity to make sure that from a patent perspective, we're not infringing on anybody else's patents, and that there's no presence of currently patented material in the seed of these expired products. Then the second piece of this, beyond the known genetics and the seed quality, is royalty collection and stewardship. And so fortunately for us, around the same time we were looking at launching these, the variety use agreement was developed by CSTA and now put forward by Seeds Canada. And it's a platform available to anyone that wants to use it, essentially through Seeds Canada, and provides both stewardship and royalty collection on these new products. So the VUA allows for royalty collection on farm-saved seed, which is an important piece of this, so that the continued development happens, but it also provides traceability. So typically with a cereal, for example, it's sold, and as a distributing company, we don't always know who that customer is. But with products going out under the VUA, as a distributor, we know who those customers are, and we can communicate them. So if something changes in the marketplace with regards to the end use markets, say they're extracted from a particular key market, we can communicate that and let the customers know. So that if we have to remove these at some point in time, that can be done. So with our experience to date, both of these soybeans are full commercial in North Dakota, and thought, well, North Dakota is not that far south of Saskatchewan and Manitoba. It's not, but there's a big difference for maturity. And so these both are kind of at the later end for our market. So they work well in the Red River Valley, but that's where our newest products also work really well. So the performance has been, as we kind of expected, has been outdone by some of the newer genetics. In the areas where they do have a fit from a risky perspective in terms of the drought or maturity, so they're kind of pushing the late end of maturity, for the western side of Manitoba. So that's where we're seeing catch with these right now, is on the western side of Manitoba, but it's really pushing maturity for both of these. So essentially our customers have moved past the 009 bean and on to 21008 GT20, which is slightly earlier, but still also kind of late for that western Manitoba market. We're still waiting for the 22 results in terms of our trials, as well as farmer experience from this year, to decide how they go forward. So in summary, the older products still offer value. They're no longer considered forbidden fruit because there's a legitimate source of seed, and that way it takes away some of the mystique. We run these right alongside some of the newest genetics, and that's where we've learned that the newer products are outperforming these by and large, but they do offer some value in risky areas. This provides by using something like the VUA, provides a responsible stewardship platform to collect royalty, but also to be able to keep in touch with customers as time moves forward. And these products will remain in the marketplace as long as the ongoing trade approval remains in those markets and the varieties continue to perform. So that's kind of our experience to date. They're relatively new. First one was launched in 2021, and we launched another one in 2022. So experience is very new with both of these.
Thank you so much, Todd. It's great to hear from somebody who is having direct experience in this area, offering products containing SGNTs, and also your comments about the VUA. I know I've been following the VUA for some time, and it's great to see that you found this additional use for it. And so I think that's going to come up during our Q&A, actually. So please hang on the line, and thank you so much for that.
Sure.
And last but definitely not least, we have Kim Kenward with us. As I mentioned, Kim is R&D Manager for 2020 Seed Labs. Thanks for joining us, Kim. There you are. Now, as an expert on seed testing, Todd made a comment a few minutes ago about having run into cases where there was seed being offered that had no genetic background. People, weren't sure what was in it, what it contained. And you're going to comment a little bit on this. When you think about SGNTs or traits that have reached the end of their IP protection, including patent protection, I'm curious what some important considerations are that people should think about, and how testing can be a useful tool. Can you sort of enlighten us a little bit about how seed testing and some of the work you've done in this area can really help people in this regard? Oh, I can't hear you, Kim. You may be on mute.
Oh, there we go.
There we go.
Our experience with traits going off patent has largely been with the RR1 and RR2 soybeans. Our involvement with it actually substantially predates that, because we've actually been testing for RR1 and RR2 since about 2013. We went through an approval process with Monsanto so that we were certified as a third-party lab to run their protocols, so that we could, and that was done. So we went through an independent validation on our own, and then we did proficiency testing with them so that they would be confident that we could actually perform the protocol to the standard that they needed. This was done in anticipation of Monsanto actually licensing the RR1 technology so that other breeders could move it into their genetic materials but still take advantage of the Roundup Ready resistance. So the initial intent was to actually help the breeders with their breeding lines and with their registrations. But once everything came off patent, it continued more or less as business as usual, except that the ability to access the test was now expanded to all growers and interested parties. So it wasn't just the licensees anymore. And that actually became really important, because as a third-party tester, we can help maintain stewardship throughout the value chain. And as we know from Trifid, at some point, someone's going to be testing for something, even though on paper, we don't necessarily have it in the system at all. This was in the system, it persists in the system, so we still need to maintain stewardship. By having a third-party tester come in and do it, we can do the testing to the confidence of the original IP owner, but we do it in confidentiality. So anyone that sends us the sample, we don't reveal who sent the sample or what their test results were. But if it ever comes up into dispute, any negative tests that we have, the IP owner will accept and take as certainty, and there shouldn't be any problems beyond that. So stewardship does become really, really important. And when RR1 versus RR2 came about, you're looking at plants that are physically identical. But one now has a trait that is off patent and is generally available. The other was not. So what we were running into was problems with people that wanted to try using the RR1, but weren't sure if the stuff that they had was RR1 or RR2. And yet Monsanto was still going around and they were checking fields to see if it was RR1 or RR2. So we had a lot of people call in to try to talk to us about the testing. And then we had some fewer samples actually come in relative to the number of calls. So I think a lot of people were just intimidated by the possibility of having to take on the stewardship responsibility themselves. But of the people that did get samples tested and that tested positive, we actually had about an even split of people that were basically checking the seed before purchasing and people that were basically trying to find out if Monsanto's results on their field was actually correct or not. And it's really, really hard for us to make those phone calls to people that are trying to verify a result that they didn't want. And they thought they had done their due diligence beforehand in terms of looking at the paperwork available from the supplier to see if that it was RR1 and not RR2. But it was much easier phone call to be making to the people that were pre-checking everything to make sure it was RR1 before they actually purchased it. So we were running parallel tests for them to check to see if it was RR1 or RR2. And if both of them were present, then we could also tell them that.
Yeah, when you obviously can't tell just by looking at it if it's RR1 or RR2. So that's where genetic testing becomes very, very important, of course. And I imagine as this issue of patent expiry and SGNTs gets talked about more and becomes even more prevalent, that there's probably going to be even more of a need for this, I'm thinking.
I believe so. There are also multiple ways in which we can actually tell whether or not it's RR1 versus RR2. So we have the IP owner approved protocol, but because some people were nervous about their technology and their detection, we also had other methods come in place that are international standards that we can use to accomplish the same thing, so that we were able to deal with both levels of people in terms of their trust for the system.
Well, thank you very much, Kim. Please, I'm going to welcome Todd and Jennifer back for our little Q&A that we are going to do now. Again, if you have a question, please just type it into the chat box and we will throw it out there to our speakers. We have a few minutes here yet before we sign off. So please, if you have any questions, just type it into the chat box. I have a question about whether or not we know what traits are scheduled to come off patent and when. I'm thinking Jennifer might be a good person to toss this one out to. Jennifer, do we have any information or any insights on what traits are scheduled to come off patent and when, or is that still something that's kind of unknown at this point?
It's still pretty unknown. So CropLife is not tracking that information. So that, interestingly, the Ag Accord. So if you look into that at all, you'll see that companies that sign up for that, as part of that, you get informed of in advance of when certain traits will be coming off patent. But we've focused more on things that would create market risk, like when an authorization would be expiring. That's when we want companies talking to the seed industry. We haven't made any requirements about informing when patents are going to come off.
I have a question here. It's a little bit over my head. I'm thinking, Kim, you might be able to offer some insight here. What about new transformation events or converted lines with the same GM traits? Kim, does that make sense to you? Is that something you can offer some insight on?
I think so. When you're talking about converted lines with same GM traits, that's what we're often talking about when we say RR1 in new genetic backgrounds. And the point is that they still are using the same basic genetic breeding stock to actually move the RR1 trait into the new line. So the address and the structure of the trait in the plant genome is still the same. It's just in a different background. So we use the same test in the new background as we did in the previous background. When it comes to new traits or new transformation events, those are going to have to go through the registration process in order to get approved for us. And then you have to do some work to actually figure out where in the genome it's sitting. But a lot of transgenic events, at least, have very similar elements that are used. So they turn the gene on, they say where the protein goes. And in those cases, we have element-specific tests. So we can test for generic elements that are present in multiple transgene events so that we can test for those as well, even if we don't know what's present. And we try and concentrate on the commercially available traits that are out there. But we do know that a lot of these elements that we test for are also available in the experimental stuff that never actually went to commercialization or that people are currently developing. So we can actually test for those as well in a generic screen for it. When we get into the gene editing concept, it's going to depend on what the kind of trait is that they're changing and the kind of change that they're making, because gene editing can be very small or very big, but the technology is there. So as long as the information is available when they register the varieties and put them out into the public commercial sphere, then we can develop those tests to test for those specific traits as well.
Thank you, Kim. I have a marketing related question. What responsibilities, financial or other, does a Canadian marketer of SGNTs have toward maintenance of domestic and export market trait approvals?
Yeah, so this one really falls into this gray area, and much of the work that CropLife Canada has been doing to try and sort that out and inform someone. And so from a SeCan's particular experience, the Roundup Ready 1 trait is still on the books with all of the export markets. And that was an important consideration for us because as a smaller product, we need to make sure that that's already in place, because it would be, in our opinion, probably cost prohibitive to redo some of those market access components. And so that's a big consideration for somebody who's considering a particular product, is that they look into that, make sure that there is those paths are still in place. Because if you're selling a product that does not have market access, there's a considerable amount of liability that could be associated with that.
Thanks, Todd. I have an audience question here. I always thought off-patent was synonymous with redundancy. It is interesting to note that IP owners still maintain interest in marketing their off-patent products. Does this not eat into the market share of new products? Is that something one of you could offer some insight on?
Well, I guess with the example I give is there's always there's a segment of the market that considers maybe these as a cheaper or value priced option, and that's kind of where my head space was going with these. And by making them available, we've been surprised by, well, I guess not surprised, but impressed with the fact that new is better, and that most of our customers have chosen, when you present the information side by side and not selling them something they don't need, but presenting the options. Here's how this one performs, here's how the new ones perform, and by and large, they've gone to the newer products. And so it's, as I mentioned in my presentation, it's kind of taking away the mystique around the forbidden fruit, or something that is not available in the marketplace, because these are available, and in this case, new is better.
I can add to that
Sure.
Also a lot of the older traits are still in stacks. So there's most of the products have multiple events in them now. You'll almost never find a product that just has one trait. And so the stacks offer benefits for resistance management purposes and just providing more tools in one. So a lot of it's offered in a package versus on its own. So it'll be offered with newer events as they become available.
The moment a trait patent expires based on the Ag Accord, can you go out and commercialize a variety with that specific trait without being in an IP conflict?
I think that's a question for a lawyer.
Yeah. If you're curious about that, probably best to seek legal advice.
Yeah.
A quick question, Jennifer. You mentioned resistance management stewardship. Are you referring to insect resistance management?
Insect resistance management and herbicide resistance management. So both of those products in Canada, I think Canada's a little bit unique with the herbicide resistance management, that there are conditions of the authorization that require you to implement a herbicide resistance management plan. But like I said, we're still really unclear what the domestic authorization requirements are. Right now, we've been told that like a generic company would not have to submit their own stewardship plan, but there is an expectation that they're implementing a stewardship plan. But it creates a bit of an unfair or unequal playing field where a generic company isn't submitting a stewardship plan, but the original company is. So we're still working out those details, but I'd say bottom line is right now is everyone should have a stewardship plan, whether it's herbicide resistance management or insect resistance management, regardless if it's required by the government or not.
The questions keep coming. We have a great audience today. Please keep the questions coming. This is wonderful. What differences do you see in Canada with bringing an insect resistance SGNT product to the market versus the herbicide tolerant ones described today?
So I wonder if my answer there just answered that. A difference in say the U.S. The U.S. has insect resistant traits are regulated by the EPA, which regulates them more like a pesticide. So any manufacturer would have to get their own permit. Versus in Canada, like I said, we're still unclear as to what the domestic regulatory requirements would be of a generic company. Like I said, right now we're not hearing that there are any, but there may be something that becomes more clear. They've been working the last couple of years diligently on developing new guidance for the triggers for when a product of plant breeding innovation requires regulatory oversight. And so this has gotten pushed aside through that. We were hoping it was going to come along with it, but it didn't. And so we're still going to be seeking some more clarity around what, if any, domestic regulatory requirements are. And I imagine it would be the same, whether it's insect or herbicide.
Todd, before we sign off, I have a quick question about the VUA. I've been following VUA for a while now, and you mentioned you started using the VUA in this area. Was that something that we always thought the VUA might be able to be used for, or was that sort of a recent development that you realized, oh, the VUA might be a really useful tool for this? How did that all play out?
It kind of happened at the same time. So the VUA was already in place as a tool for collection of royalty and was just getting its feet under it. And then these products came along, which needed a stewardship component, and the VUA offered that. So rather than going out and starting something from scratch, it made sense to use a tool that's in the marketplace.
Interesting. Well, no, thank you, everybody. This was great. Wonderful discussion here today. Lots of great questions. Kim and Todd and Jennifer, thank you so much for your time.
Appreciate the opportunity.
We'll be
Wonderful
following
to talk to you as always.
Yeah, and we'll be following this. For the foreseeable future, this is going to be an issue that's becoming more and more important. So, this will be the beginning of a very important discussion. So thank you very much, everyone. And I just want to take the opportunity to thank our sponsors one more time, 2020 Seed Labs and SeCan, for their support. Again, this webinar was recorded, so if you would like to watch it after the fact, you'll be able to do so very, very soon on our website, germination.ca. And thank you to our audience today for the wonderful questions and for spending a good chunk of your lunch hour with us. This is Mark Zinkowitz, editor of Germination, signing off. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Take care.